Okay. And now that we've got that, and we've got a good portion of our attendees coming in, we'll go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. My name is Alex Inman. I'm the president of Educational Collaborators, and we are a EdTech consulting and professional development organization. We're actually, we have mostly independent school folks on this call today, and a lot of our organization was actually born out of independent schools. I recognize many of you guys from either my own professional network or from the IACD listserv. Thanks so much for joining us today. So I'm going to introduce our speakers in just a minute, and we will have plenty of time for Q&A at the end as well. So it's not a very long webinar, but I wanted to share that share some of my experience and kind of how leasing kind of came to me in the first place, because it wasn't really anything that was on my radar as I was learning how to do educational technology. And I was at a school that the head of school said, we're going to have a one-to-one program. This is 20 years ago now. Head of school said, we're going to have a one-to-one program. Business officer said, I have no idea how we're going to do a one-to-one program. And so we sat down and figured stuff out, and we got introduced to, this was so long ago, Compaq was our vendor. We got introduced to leasing agents at Compaq. We found out that we could spread out our costs, and it made more sense, and it was going to work with our operating budget much better, and we decided to do that. And it was an unmitigated disaster. The leasing experience was horrible for the school. There were so many unanticipated costs that we ran into. It was a real significant struggle. I had a pretty big wall up when it came to any kind of leasing structure when I moved to St. Louis and started working at Whitfield School. And I met Bob Klobowski, one of our speakers today, and he walked me through things, and I was pretty harsh on him because of my previous experience. And he explained to me a lot of the options that can exist in leasing. My problem that I had with leasing wasn't that leasing was fundamentally bad, though that's what I thought. The problem was there are a lot of pitfalls, and you as school leaders need to know those pitfalls going into a leasing scenario so that you're prepared. But once you do, you can find that it can be very valuable, not only on the front end in terms of managing the costs, but also on the back end in terms of obsolescence. And it's what Glenn Lesnick is going to be talking about as well on our short webinar today. So without further ado, let me introduce Bob Klobowski from Capital Technology and Leasing, who has worked with me for years, and now he's in other organizations as well. In fact, Bob, I think that's not the current organization that you're with, so I think
that's okay.
I kind of flipped back into my old days there.
It's okay.
And Glenn Lesnick, who's Vice President of Corporate Leasing Associates in New Jersey. He's been doing the leasing game for 27 years, but for the last 15, he's been working exclusively with schools, which is really valuable. And so having people like Bob and Glenn who not only understand the financial mechanisms of leasing, but really understand schools, so that it made sense for me to do leasing at schools where we were small, made sense for me to do leasing at large schools like Sidwell Friends, where we have plenty of capital, but it still made sense operationally. And so I asked these guys to come and share a little bit of how they approach this, because I think a lot of schools don't have an opportunity to have these conversations. So with that, Glenn, am I handing it to Bob or you?
Let's start with Bob.
Very good.
Well, before we begin, I just want to say thanks to everybody for joining us today. Just very quick overview of my background. I'm an accountant by my education. I'm a computer person by my training. I'm an old guy who was so old that I was a computer programmer on the Apollo project in the 1960s. And I left the computer field, started my own technology leasing company, and during the course of a significant period of time, starting in 1999, 2000, we began doing one-to-one schools and providing funding for one-to-one schools. And over the last 20 years have helped more than 150 schools put programs in place, school districts, colleges, and universities. And so we bring that experience in how to finance and fund technology to this webinar today. And so what I'd like to do is kind of walk through our PowerPoint presentation with you. And we want to talk to you about a product that we have developed that is very exciting, and we've had just amazing response to it by people looking to fund their technology. So Glenn, if you want to move along, we'll go to the first slide.
Sure. Yeah, let's
Maybe.
get here.
There
we go.
So is this thing, it says, what if a lease was structured from a school's perspective? And that's really a critical point right there, because one of the issues you have probably heard, if anybody's talked about leasing, is a lot of people have said, oh, it's always benefits the lessor. Well, we would like to present you an idea that is from the viewpoint of the school, and that's where we're going to go today. You know, here's another great question. What if the lease minimized cost and provided financial stability and safety? So in other words, something that you could bank on, something that you knew was going to be for real, and that a lot of the mystery was taken out of it, that we put all the cards on the table and showed you how it works. And of course, you know, as we have stated a few moments ago, and Alex addressed in his opening remarks, what if that structure could do away with leasing concerns like Alex had, and mitigate literally any issues that would make you raise questions as to why should I do this? So I'd like to take just a couple moments, if you wouldn't mind, to frame this all by talking about the advantages of leasing versus purchasing. So the most common reasons that we see organizations choose leasing is because of, first of all, low monthly payments, payments that can be fixed as opposed to the payments that would float. That you don't have to use your credit lines that you have with the banks, that the payments themselves can be monthly or quarterly or annual, that they can be structured essentially to work for whatever the school feels is important. We can protect against obsolescence, meaning, I don't know how many of you have ever worked in a school where the IT equipment is one of the last things on the budget. And somebody says, well, we can get another year out of those desktops. We can get another year out of those laptops. And with that, you get the obsolescence and the failure rate and the unreliability. Leasing has lots of options that you can either return the equipment, or you can purchase it, or you can continue to lease it. And then one of the big things that people don't realize, you can include in a lease not just like a piece of hardware or a laptop, but if there are software, or there are services or maintenance or additional warranties, or anything that you want to include can be included in that particular lease. And it can all be lumped into a single payment that you pay each month or each quarter annually, depending on how you budget. And you don't have to have money going in all different directions to accomplish a task. And then finally, obviously, you conserve capital when you lease, meaning most technology, you would have to say, is a depreciating asset. And it'd be better to put your money into a building or something that appreciates in value, land, whatever it might be, as opposed to a depreciating asset. Okay, Glenn. The other thing that I want to talk about for just a brief moment is leasing versus, as we know, some of our schools go out and they just borrow from their banks. And most of the time, the bank will require a down payment where a lease doesn't require it. Most of the time, the banks want to float the rate, meaning if rates go up, your payment goes up. If rates go down, your payment goes down. Leases are always fixed payment basis. There's also the fact that there's an opportunity cost, as I said earlier, that this money, if you use bank, then you've tied up your bank line with technology, versus how you could use it for other aspects of the school. And then finally, the lease will allow you to finance services, including software installation, maintenance. Banks will never let you do that. All right, Glenn.
Okay. Well, let me explain where we're going, and I think you find this very interesting because what we've done, we've been leasing, and I personally, as Alex mentioned, have been working with schools for I think 17, 18 years now, exclusively with schools. And there's nothing more I love doing than figuring things out and strategizing and structuring different ways to fund for students. So that's love doing that. And what happened recently with the pandemic really brought to the forefront problems that were existing with the current lease structures that we've been using. And what do I mean by that? What happened this past time, as many of you I'm sure went through, was, well, for one thing, the students weren't necessarily in some schools to be around to return the equipment. So the equipment was returned late. And when that's on lease and it has to be returned, that just translates into extra monthly payments and higher costs. Another thing that happened was typically schools do warranties and they like to repair things under warranty before they're returned so that they don't get these damage charges. And what happened was, with all the backlog and the delays in shipping because of the pandemic, which was really bad, the parts weren't available and they were waiting on them and they couldn't return the equipment. So once again, it has to go month to month until the units are ready to be returned. So this became really costly. And during the summer, when Bob and I were talking about this, we realized, you know what, looking back, had we just done different structures, so many of these issues could have been avoided. So we really thought, like, what could we do to help schools out to structure at least differently, like from their perspective, as we mentioned before, that would totally avoid these problems. So before I tell you what this structure is, it's called the hybrid lease. What I'd like to do just for a moment is just to give you a little bit of background of the two types of leases that schools typically use. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with the fair market value lease. I don't necessarily need to read through all these because you'll all receive a copy. But for the most part, I'd like to explain it as very similar to a car lease, where you use it for a period of time. You make the payments. They're much lower than they would be if you would finance a car to own it. And then you return at the end, and there's a residual value. So same thing with the laptops, for example. So payments are made compared to a dollar buyout or a finance lease, they're going to be lower. It helps the school keep technology forward because they refresh the equipment more frequently. And at the end of the lease, you have different options. You can return all the equipment. You can keep some of the equipment. You can go month to month if you'd like to until you decide, or you could just buy it for the then fair market value and own it at the end like that. However, there are some concerns with the fair market value lease, and some of them I just mentioned, but the unexpected cost is probably the number one reason why schools don't continue to lease, or at least that's the bad taste they have in their mouth. And I'll tell you just one thing we experienced, and one of our larger clients came to us initially. This was because of an unexpected cost, and this happens, believe it or not, more often than you believe. But his case was, it said in the master lease that the equipment needs to be returned by the 7th of the month following the termination of the lease. In other words, he had 7 days to return the equipment. So he had shipped the equipment back, and it was at the dock to be received on a Friday. But they were so busy, the people at the dock said, you know what, come back after the weekend, Monday, because we can't accept it today. So come Monday, they delivered the equipment, which was the 10th. And then the school received a bill for $14,000 because it was delivered after the date it was supposed to be in the system. You would think, I mean, common sense would be, well, what business person would do that? But this is what schools have to deal with. It's just these crazy unexpected costs. In the end, they ended up settling. They didn't pay the full amount, but they paid an amount for something they shouldn't have paid anything. It's just crazy. Same thing happens with damage charges. Sometimes they're in excess of what you'd expect, especially if you're working with budgets and you figure I'm making a certain number of payments on a fair market value lease, and then all of a sudden you get these damage bills and it just comes out of nowhere. And you're like, you know what, we can't go through this again. So these are issues with it. High buyout cost is another issue. The added monthly cost, the month-to-month payments that I mentioned when you can't return things on time. So it's a structure that has existed for as long as I can remember, but there are a lot of problems with it. When you compare it to a dollar buyout, again, this is very similar to a bank. If you just go and finance something, you pay for it over a term and then you own it at the end. So you're paying for the equipment plus an interest rate and then you own it. So it has some benefits. What are the benefits? The benefits of ownership. In some cases, you want that. In schools in particular, sometimes for juniors and seniors, if you're doing a 24-month lease, you want the seniors to own the equipment, dollar buyout makes plenty of sense. They could own it at the end. There are some issues with it also, especially when compared to a fair market value. The payments are a little higher. It doesn't have the flexibility of being able to return the equipment. And the truth is you're stuck with equipment that's you kind of want refreshed after a period of time. I mean, I know a lot of schools out there like using equipment 4, 5, 6 years, but I think we can all agree the problems start probably 36 months into it, 48 months, the costs go up, and it's probably best to refresh the equipment or get on a schedule or cycle to do so. So what we've come up with is something that took a look at the structures and decided to take the best of both of them, the benefits that each one has, and get rid of the worst part of the others. So let's just take a look. I'll bring my my pointer in here now. So the top part will focus on the fair market value, where it offers the flexibility of return, but we have the problem of the unforeseen costs on this side. We figure out a structure that got rid of that. Same thing with the dollar buyout, the bottom part. It has a benefit of ownership, but it doesn't have the flexibility of return. So the structure we use also takes care of that. So how does this work? And it's very simple. 3 parts. Number 1, like any lease, you make a fixed payment over the term. So think of it initially as a dollar buyout structure. So you make the payments. At the end of the term, you are the owner of the equipment. The title's transferred to the school. Then you can send the equipment back to our company. We remarket the equipment and send a check for 88% of the proceeds. So what does this do in effect? In effect, it completely mitigates all the problems with a fair market value lease. And if that's not easily understood, let me just explain how. When you are the owner of the equipment and you have title of the equipment, the leasing company cannot charge you month-to-month rent because you paid for it, it's yours. There's no more cost in that regard. You don't have to worry about returning the equipment because it's yours. You're the owner. You don't have to return it. There's no fees or any cost for end of lease notification that sometimes get charged because you don't have to notify. You're the owner. It completely mitigates all the problems that schools have, but it allows you to still, like a fair market value, have us remarket the equipment for you and then send over those funds. So on the one hand, it saves you, it provides security and safety, but best of all, at the same time, it saves you a lot of money over a fair market value lease. And that's the beauty of this. And I'll tell you, we've been doing fair market value leases for as long as we've been in existence, and that's since 1982. I backtracked probably over the last 5 years of leases that we've done with schools to compare how this structure would look against what leases we've done. And in every single case, this hybrid lease structure outperformed right down the aisle, every single case. And here's how it works, because it's all about what the numbers work out to. So not to be afraid that it's numbers. This is a very simplified case with real numbers. And I'll just go through it very quickly. We'll take 2 minutes to go through the numbers, but this will really give you an example to see how this works. For a unit cost, a single laptop is $1,000 and there's 500 of them. So the total cost of a schedule is $500,000. On this side, we have a fair market value lease. This is what the pricing would be for this. Total monthly payment, 18,000 and change. Whereas a hybrid lease, which I mentioned, the payments would be higher, kind of like a dollar buyout structure initially, would be 21,800 and change, right? Total payments, if you just multiply, this is a 24-month lease, so 24 times this number equals 523,000. And then 18,000 times 24 is this number. Let me just carry this to the next page. So fair market value lease, again, your total payments over the lease is this versus this. Now, right off the bat, you would think, oh, well, clearly the fair market value lease will cost us less money. And you'd be right if things ended there, but let's face it, you can't really judge a lease until it's finished. And it's not finished when when the term is up. You then have to return the equipment. There could be extra monthly payments, as I mentioned, if things are delayed. There could be damage charges also. So here's how a typical lease works. And this one, for this specific numbers, actually happened. So these are pretty exact numbers. When we receive equipment, it's graded. It's sent to a warehouse and audited. And here's a typical breakdown, which is 20-60-20, grade A, B, and C and below. So for this case, on 500 units, 100 of them were grade A, 300 B, and another 100 C. And here are the prices on average we receive for each, and here are the totals based on that. So if you add up all these numbers, the leasing company received a check for $110,000 on this equipment that was returned in that condition that it was in. So how does this compare now? So if we take a look at the hybrid lease where the total payments were this, we received $110,000. So with this structure, we would now take 88% of that and send that check back to the school. School would get $96,800. How does that compare to the fair market value? Well, initially, this was the outflow, 438, which seemed like it was a lot less than the hybrid. Okay, they had an advantage initially of 85,000. However, with all the damage charges and whatever else happened, which is typically in the, let's say 3 to 5% range, so we use 4 in this example, the total benefit it comes down from 85 to 65. So when you compare the two, the net advantage and the money in the school's pocket over this short 24-month lease is over $30,000. And what happens if there's an extra month-to-month payment, just one? And this past cycle, we had lots of schools that had more than one. The difference of another monthly payment of $18,000 in this case would bring that difference, the delta, to close to $50,000. And again, not such a large schedule, but tens of thousands of dollars difference back in the school's pocket. So it was really this pandemic that brought things to the forefront and made us rethink how to structure this to the school's advantage. And we think we've come up with something that is really beneficial. And I don't want to take too much more time discussing it. I think a lot more will come out in the question and answer session. But this, again, I'll include this in the PowerPoint presentation. We'll send everybody a PDF copy of it. And with that, I'll send it back to Alex and we'll open it up for discussion.
Thanks, Glenn and Bob. I want to add a little more about my experience after Glenn and Bob had a chance to kind of talk through some of the definitions. One of the first things is my head really started spinning as I started to sit down with leasing people and start learning what fair market value was and lease rates and residual values and all these different terms and what they meant, because what they really meant were real dollars to my school. And so it was important for me to take some time to get to know that. Now I kind of geek out about it, and I enjoy it. Enjoy these conversations and these pieces. But a piece that I want to share with you as well is I expected my business manager to understand leasing and know about leasing when I came to the conversation, and I was wrong. And that was the case in 3 different schools that that I found that just by sitting down and working with Bob on some leasing, I came to the conversation with a stronger grasp of the levers that you can pull in leases. And I was surprised, I guess, that my business manager didn't know more about this than I did. So I kind of want to prepare you for that possibility that you may be going into a conversation where your business manager may not understand that, and he or she may also have some preconceived notions about leasing, just like I did before I met Bob. So so I think that those are some important things to kind of keep in mind. These slides and this recording, I think, will be helpful for you in sort of staging that conversation. And if you are advanced in that conversation, then involving Glenn or Bob to help you can be very, very beneficial as well. And so I'm kind of just speaking for them and throwing them into that possibility. But if you're serious, they'll be more than happy to have that kind of conversation with you, which I found really helpful. So questions about this? If you want to like challenge the model and say, yeah, I saw how you laid that out there, but what about this or what about that? Throw that out here. Let's have a conversation about this or questions that you have about this, or comments. Where are you in some of your finance considerations and conversations, and why did you come to this session? Just unmute your mic and go ahead and speak.
I have a question. Just wondering, like, how does it actually work? I mean, so for example, we're an Apple school primarily. Oops, sorry, I don't have my video on. Sorry. Sometimes it's kind of hard to buy stuff from Apple. But so how does it work? Like, does CLASS buy the equipment and then lease it back to us? So that would be helpful to understand.
So Lisa, let me answer that for you. Essentially what would happen is you would get a quote from Apple to purchase whatever you wanted to purchase. You would send that quote over to Glenn. Glenn would prepare a hybrid lease quote for you. You could then get that quote approved under whatever process you have at the school. Once that's approved and you decide you want to go ahead, then CLASS, Corporate Leasing Associate School Solutions, issues a purchase order to Apple. What'll happen is when the equipment ships to you, then Apple will invoice Corporate Leasing Associates. They'll pay the bill. And the next thing that'll happen is you'll have a lease document, the hybrid lease that we talked about, and you would just make the lease payments under the hybrid lease. So effectively, the actual process has Corporate Leasing School Solutions doing the PO with Apple, paying Apple, and then you just make a monthly payment under the hybrid lease to Corporate Leasing School Solutions. That's it in a nutshell.
Yes.
Lisa, you're muted.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So how does your lease structure compare to Apple's? Because they also have a lease.
Yes, they will have a lease. Consistently, when we compare our rates to their rates, we can usually beat their rates, but they won't have the hybrid lease. That won't be available. This is a product that we developed and we offer it exclusively. Someday it might be out there in the marketplace. We haven't seen it anywhere else yet because really, quite frankly, in my opinion, the leasing side of it is they don't want to give up those profits. And we looked at it and we said, what's fair and reasonable? And what we felt was fair and reasonable was the hybrid, whereby we still get paid for our work, but that the vast majority of the dollars go back to the schools. And you'd go, why would we do that? Well, we've seen the downside of it, and we've seen the mistreatment of schools in this environment. And we said, we have to come up with a solution that is more palatable, and that's why we did this.
Yeah, let me jump in here also, Lisa, to answer the question as well. This is a story I'm going to tell you very quickly that happened about, I'm going to say 4 or 5 years ago with French American school in New York, who is an Apple school also. And Jonathan Mamlock was the technology director. He can confirm our conversation. So the first time we worked with them and I gave him numbers, he called me back and he said, I have numbers for leasing from Apple and I have your numbers. And I just want to make sure you did this right. And I said, how do you mean? He said, your numbers are completely different. I mean, like not even close to what Apple numbers are. And it was like comparing, at the time, it was like Apple took the equipment plus an interest rate.
Mhm.
And what we do, we put equity into our transactions. So that, I guess when you compare apples to apples, no pun intended,
Mhm.
it's like a negative interest rate. So my rate to him was like negative 8% because out of the $1,000 units, he was only paying $826 over the term, whereas Apple, he was paying $1,050 something.
Mhm.
So in other words, he was paying the cost plus an interest rate. So by leasing several hundred units, he was saving thousands and thousands of dollars on the lease. So clearly that made sense. And the hybrid lease, compared to the fair market value, will save not only much more compared to an Apple lease, but will put that much more money back in your pocket, because the residuals that I used in the estimate that we shared with you were for just typical Dell, Lenovo laptops. Apple's residual value happens to be much higher. So those numbers would be much more to your benefit with Apple. I mean, there's nothing that holds the residual like Apple equipment. So
Mhm.
yeah, it's a big difference.
I guess the other benefit is with Apple, you have to go find your own vendor to sell your equipment to, right? So it sounds like you guys provide that vehicle then.
Yeah,
Yes.
Lisa, we have literally hundreds and hundreds of outlets
Okay.
that we utilize. So basically, and that not just here in the US, outside of the US also. And essentially, I don't want to call it an auction, but to some degree it is that we go out and we are going to essentially take your product and auction it among the hundreds of resources that we have to get the highest value. Why would we do that? Well, we're going to get 12% of whatever that number is, right?
Yeah.
So the higher the number we get you, the better we get paid for doing the work for you.
Okay. And then my one last question, sorry, I'm dominating this,
Oh, that's okay.
is
That's
with
okay.
sorry. So Apple has Apple Care, and I think, I'm not certain, but I think you have to get Apple Care if you lease
And,
through
and you can
Apple.
order that right on the equipment, and we can finance it right in it, and it will be right on the machine, just as though you bought it directly from Apple Care.
And what if you don't want
We
to
do it all the time.
Okay, what if you don't want to do that? What if you don't want Apple Care?
Then you don't have to, because you would we would order it from Apple without it and lease it to you without it.
Okay.
Yeah, you get more flexibility. Also, I would be remiss if I didn't say that you can bundle all sorts of things into your lease, like the damage, accidental protection, warranty uplifts, all those kinds of things can go in there. But you can also include things like, I don't know, change management consulting services or professional development from educational collaborators. It just, if you wanted to roll that into your lease, you could do that.
Absolutely.
Got it. Thank you.
Yes. In fact, that's not, what Alex said, that's not uncommon at all. We do that all the time. If you have a professional service, for example, that you want to accomplish and you'd like to pay for it over the lease period of 2 or 3 years, very simple to do that for us. Effectively, Glenn would do the same thing with Alex. He'd issue a PO to Alex. Alex would send an invoice, and it would get included on the lease with the equipment.
Correct.
Bob, can I ask, I'm sorry, Lisa, were you done? Okay. One of my questions, because I'm in the throes of rolling out devices right now, has to do with ownership and like Apple School Manager. Because we have run into an issue with grant devices, and then before I came, it was a mess, and I'm cleaning up that mess right now. So I guess I'm thinking about the process you laid out. Those devices, like are we purchasing them? So Apple will, I can search order numbers and they'll show up on Apple School Manager, or am I going to have to manually pull them in en masse into my Apple School Manager, and how does that work?
From what we understand and what we've heard from all of our other schools that do this, because when we order them, all they're doing is invoicing us. The actual acknowledgement of where the asset is located, who the owner of it is, and who the manager of that asset is, your school. So we're nothing more than the invoice to. So if you look at it, invoice and ship to and user, they are different things on the invoice. So Apple knows those are your devices at your location. They're just invoicing us for payment. That's all.
Okay. So we would get the quote. We would just give you like the quote number, and you would say we're paying for this quote number
Exactly
for
correct.
this school.
100% correct.
Yeah. Ship to is to the school, bill to is to the leasing company. That's
And
all.
that ties into the model, I guess, where we would own it at the end of the lease, because technically we already, it's like a house, it's in your name, but you don't really own it. The bank is
Correct.
paying, so I guess it's, so that makes sense. There was something else I was thinking along those lines, but
Well,
okay, that makes
but
sense.
you reminded me of something else that I forgot that I think is really important for us to talk about for a moment. In the hybrid lease, when you get to the end, and let's say you leased 500 units, okay? And all of a sudden you decide, well, there's 100 of these units we want to keep, or we want to gift them or grant them or do whatever we want. You own them. All then you would say to us is, oh, we're only giving you 400 back, and we want you to take care of those 400 for us. You're not going to see the other 100.
Okay.
And that's the other beauty of this. You have the flexibility to decide what happens, and you can choose, this is how many I want or how many I don't want, or you can set them all back. But that's the beauty of the hybrid. It gives you the flexibility to control what happens to that asset.
Yes. And let me jump in and mention also, though the example we showed was the hybrid versus a fair market value lease, we've also been asked numerous times to say, well, we typically purchase equipment. How does it compare versus a purchase? And interestingly, it outperforms the purchase also. In fact, I have, because I'm looking at my other screen here, if I could share this with you for a second.
For somebody just a couple weeks ago
that's what I'm looking at.
Small college in Wisconsin.
Right. So here, I'll just run through very quickly. This is versus a purchase. There's a straight purchase column right over here. The equipment is $721,000 worth, plus some ADP and license. So a total of close to $1 million, a little under. Where if you come down to the bottom here, a straight purchase, you're out $991,000. Whereas the total lease payments with a hybrid would come out to, again, a little bit more, but then we remarket it. And in this case, the residual averaging all of the things that we figured would come out to $146. So after recovering that and sending a check for 88% of the proceeds, the school would have an advantage of $81,000 in their pocket, which is not bad. And that's versus a purchase. And also they don't have to worry about taking care of that themselves if they wanted to sell the equipment. And I should just mention, if a school, not that they would think this, but if they think, oh, we could just do this ourselves and we'll sell it, trust me, after doing this for 25 years in the remarketing business, we could get a lot more value than a school can on its own. Just because there's so many methods, there's so many vendors, there's so many ways, domestic, international, how to get more, opening up the equipment, putting other things into it, changing things around, refreshing it. We get the most value we can out of a unit at the end. So my camera went out for a second. It should probably pop up in a second. There you go. Yeah, so.
Well, and there's, and those of you who've done this,
let me come back here.
The work that it takes to find a buyer, organize all your stuff, inventory it, sell it, and get it to somebody else. It's a pain. It's a real pain.
Right.
So having somebody, that can reclaim that, end of life materials and then take it away is easier. Now, I also did that where, I just worked with sort of okay, who can do electronics, remarketing and find stuff. And because I had been through leases, I really wanted to see what's the residual value, what are they expecting it at, and then what percentage are they keeping versus what I'm getting. And these percentages are also very, very attractive. So even if you're doing that already, it's worth taking a look at for this. And then the last thing that I want to add to this topic that was asked when I invited Bob and Glenn to present to the collaborators that work with educational collaborators as well. And one of them asked, well, wait a minute. So I am interested in doing this hybrid lease so that the stuff can go away, but I've got like a room of old electronics that I also need to get rid of. Can you help me with that? And can you do that? And Glenn, that's also a possibility as a service from your organization, right?
Absolutely. As I mentioned then, we get calls and emails all the time asking, do you have any equipment? Everybody's looking. And we work with several dozen places. Of course, we have a group of really, I'd say a little bit more than a handful that we use most and that we trust and that we've been working with for decades. But there's always an appetite for more equipment, especially now. And if you do have some laying around, we'll turn it into cash and make that happen.
And I will tell you a story about that too. We had a school that said to us, can you dispose of all this? And we said yes. And we told them this is what we could get them for it. And the school said to us, well, Bob, I don't really want to check. Well, what do you mean you don't want to check? Well, if you send us a check, someone else is going to get that money, not us. So they said, is it possible that you could apply that check to our new lease so as to basically lower our cost of our lease? And of course we said, sure, we'll just show a line item that shows a discount or whatever you want. And you'll see that that money got applied to the lease and your monthly payment's going to be lower now because of that.
Can I just ask about the sort of the end of life timeline? Like I know you were talking before, Glenn, about the return of equipment and things like that. So like, what is a typical like time frame, and like how does the equipment get from us to you, and then from you sold and a check and all that stuff?
Yeah, that's a great question. So typically, at the end of a lease, say June 30th is the last when it ends. So June 1st is the last payment. It ends June 30th. So we give a week or two for the equipment to be shipped out. I mean, I can speak from us personally saying if a school ever calls and says, we're a little delayed, we need a couple more days or another week, my answer is always, sure, no problem. Take your time. That's fine. I can tell you that other leasing companies won't say that. They'll say if it's not back by the 7th, you owe another month. That being said, once the equipment's in, it's shipped directly to a warehouse where we have it audited. The people we work with work quickly. A lot of places will say, we'll give you an audit report in 30 days. We get that down to probably 5 to 7 days. So we'll have that done. And typically, even before that, we'll have pre-sold the equipment because we'll know that it's coming back. We'll get quotes from various places to know who to send it to initially. And then we'll go with the one that paid for it. So everything, once it's audited, they'll say, okay, here's what we were going to pay. Here's the condition it's in if there's any really big problems. And again, we work with people we trust and that aren't going to charge nickel and dimes for this scratch and this little thing. So once we get past that and we have the final number, then we should have a check. I would say the process from beginning to end, beginning meaning the equipment's returned to the time we have a check in hand, the typical turnaround time should be within 30 days. Now, there are exceptions, and the exceptions are if the condition of the equipment, let's say recently we've had screen issues with a lot. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Lenovo's issue with the compressed screens and they make marks on the screen. Amazingly, since we've been through it many times, we figured out ways to get more value out of it because the people we work with literally have Lenovo reps come to their living room to make repairs of the screens under the warranty that end up with having new screens that get a lot more value than ones that are damaged. So I don't know of any other company or backend that does that. They'll just end up getting probably $50 or $75 less per unit. But if we have them fixed, we'll get more value out of it that way.
You know, one thing I wanted to say at this point too, Glenn, about that
Sure.
in the return, under the hybrid scenario, if you go with that, the beauty of that is if it takes you a couple extra weeks to get your equipment together and get it organized for us to be able to get it from you, there's no penalty to you in that whatsoever, none. It's just it's just taking you a little longer than a different school that is doing it for whatever reason. Maybe you had some issues with students getting them back to you, or maybe there was some issues with an employee at school who gets this stuff ready, who's on vacation or sick. The beauty of the hybrid is that's an irrelevant topic. It doesn't impact what you're going to get for the equipment. Now,
Yeah,
if you
thanks for
gave it
pointing
back
that
to
out.
us- yeah,
That's a big difference. You're right. That's
Yes.
absolutely right. Because I was speaking from a fair market value
Right.
standpoint in terms of what's typically the timeline for that. But you're absolutely right, especially now if you don't have parts and you want to get it fixed first so that we get that done under warranty first, then yeah, take your time. If it is 2 or 3 weeks, it's totally up to you. There's no more charges. And the bottom line is, I think to everybody, as long as you can get more value, is it worth $50 or $60 more a unit to you to send it back a couple of weeks later? I would think, yeah, absolutely. Especially if you have hundreds of them, that's a big difference.
Yeah.
So definitely worth it.
And by the way, we also work with partners so that if you're stressed on getting something repaired under warranty, we work with partners that are all certified to do those repairs, even in the Apple world. So if you had a block of machines and you just weren't able to get to the repair of them,
Right.
we can have them sent to a partner that will repair them under their warranty or accidental damage on your behalf to get the value out of them. So that's another stress we can take away from you at the end if your schedule wouldn't permit you and your staff to do it under the warranty and ADP.
Yes. And all drives are always wiped, because that's a big question we get to. Do you do?
Right.
Yes. And if anybody ever tells you that, oh, we charge for wiping drives, everybody has to wipe drives. Nobody
They
can sell a piece of, they have to, but they'll just try to get more money doing it that way by saying it's an extra $5 per unit to wipe the drive first.
Yeah,
No,
we
don't
wipe the
believe
drive on
that.
every
Yeah.
machine and then
Yeah.
put a new put a new base back on it, just because we have to. It's just one of our requirements.
Yeah. Okay, anybody else could jump in?
Any other questions or comments?
No, and Glenn, all your contact information is on this somewhere, isn't it?
Yeah, I believe I will send out a copy of the PowerPoint as a PDF, and with that, we'll have the contact information. And I guess the website is a good place to get more information about it. There's a FAQ there also for frequently asked questions that we haven't discussed.
Yep. And everyone who registered, you've provided us an email address. We'll use that email address to send you the link to the recording, the slides, and then any contact information. So that'll go out in a couple of days. Just give me time to render the video and get it linked up.
Right.
Well, thank you everyone very much for attending. I'm going to go ahead and close the recording. Thanks so much. I'll be in touch soon with all the follow-up information.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for taking time today. Appreciate it.
Thank you.